Hello, it's me again. How are you doing? I hope that you are doing great. As you can see, I'm doing great. I'm coming to you live from a beautiful Greek island. Not really, but it's nice to pretend. I hope everybody who's tuning in is safe and well and good. What we're going to do today is we're going to do a very brief overview of IELTS. I want to talk to you a little bit about the IELTS test and what to expect with it. So let me give you an overview of the test. There's actually two types of tests, general and academic. The main difference has to do with the writing. So just to kind of make it clear to you, the IELTS academic exam is for people who want to take academic courses. Maybe you want to go to school in a specific country or something like that. You might also need to take IELTS academic if you are you need a job that requires specific English skills. The general, what's happening? Technical difficulty. The general, I don't know what happened here because it's supposed to have general too. Here it is. The technical difficulties. You know, if you have attended any Zoom meetings or anything like that, maybe you've had a few technical difficulties like I have. Anyway, the general training is usually for people moving to countries where English is not the first language. So if you are hoping to immigrate, also sometimes people take general training just to demonstrate to people what their language ability is. That's fine. People do that. Hey, whatever works for you, right? Okay, let's move on. So the IELTS, so the test itself, when you do the test, it's going to take like about 4 hours. I would block out a day. Usually, in most centers that I've worked in, you do the whole test in one day. So you probably in the morning, you do the bulk of the test. It takes about 3.5, 4 hours. And then you'll do your speaking test. In some places, you might do the speaking test a day or two before you do your exam or after you do your exam. It just depends. But it's a lot. The whole test itself is about 4 hours. So let's break it down. IELTS writing is about 1 hour. There are two parts to the writing test. Part one, or task one, is 150 words, and you have 20 minutes to complete it. Part two, or task two, is oh, this is wrong. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. I was frantically trying to update this. But task two is 250 words and 40 minutes to complete. Just to clarify, you write a letter in task one for academic training, but I'll get into that. I'll clarify. So don't worry about my typo. IELTS reading is 1 hour, and there's 3 reading sections for IELTS reading. The sections are really long, so it might not be something that you are used to managing. Just expect that they're going to be long. And it's okay, because the aim is actually to demonstrate your ability to find information from reading text. So it's not reading for fun. It's reading to find information. And so don't worry when those texts are so long. It just means that you're going to look through the whole text to find your info, okay? Here are some tips for IELTS reading. Tip 1, read the instructions. This seems pretty obvious, but you would be surprised how many people skip this. I guess you just get nervous and you're like, I need to do this test. What am I going to do? But the instructions are going to tell you things like how many words you can have in your answer, which is sometimes important. They're going to tell you things like, can you use a choice more than once? That's really useful. It's great. Sometimes this happens. Sometimes the instructions will give you an example, and they'll use one of your choices. And if you can't use choices more than once, well, that's great. You can just cross one out right then and there. It's great. The key really to IELTS success on the reading is to be an efficient reader. What does being efficient mean? It means making good use of your time. And speaking of timing, watch your timing. This is key. 20 minutes per section only. Remember, there are 3 sections. You have 1 hour. So just 20 minutes. Once you're done, move on, because you have to finish this. And speaking of efficiency, always, always, always start with the questions, not the text. Never read the text before reading the questions. Why? Well, because it's really easy to get lost in those long readings, you know? Suddenly you start seeing words you don't know, and what does this mean? And oh my God, I don't get it. And you can just kind of circle the same area of your reading again and again. You don't want to do that? No. So instead, read the questions first. The questions are going to give you an idea of how to answer things, and then you can use the questions to help guide you through the text. It's a much more efficient and, I would say, less scary way of doing things. Speaking of which, do not worry about big words that you don't know on the IELTS reading exam. Guess what? There will 100% be words that you don't know on the IELTS exam. There are words that I don't know on the IELTS reading exam. I have been teaching IELTS for almost 20 years. I think I'm pretty good at English, and I have worked as an IELTS examiner for like 5 years. I still find words I don't know on IELTS reading. So don't worry about it. Do your best to guess and use what you've guessed to figure out your answer. Will you always be right? No, you won't be. But a lot of times you will be, and a lot of times those big words do not matter. You know what does matter? Little words that you do know. They are often very, very important to finding the right answer. So for example, if the answer is most children instead of all children, those are little words and you know them. They are often really key to finding the answer. So those are my tips for reading. Now I want to talk to you a little bit about listening. So for IELTS listening, there are 4 sections for IELTS listening. There are 10 questions per section. And the order of the sections is always pretty much the same. So section 1 is usually a general discussion. It could be anything like calling about a credit card bill, or talking with someone's dad about moving, or I don't know, inquiring about a place to live. These are all really typical IELTS test 1, but it's just like a general discussion. It's often like a phone type discussion, I have noticed. Section 2 is usually a longer monologue. Again, it's more general. So it's often an interview, but then there's really just one person talking for most of it. So different listenings I've heard for that include like someone talking about quitting smoking, or a news report about some proposed construction, but generally one person giving information. Section 3 is always some type of class discussion. So it could be a couple people discussing an assignment. It could be a presentation where people are giving their results from something that they did. It could be someone at the school having a talk with new students. These are all really typical IELTS questions. It could also be an academic, but yeah, it'll be a discussion of some kind. So where section 1 had a discussion, it was general. Section 3 has a discussion, and it's academic. And then the final section, section 4, is always an academic lecture of some type. So it's similar to section 2. You have a monologue, but again, in this case, instead of it being a general topic, it's academic. See what they've done there? Half of it is general, half of it is academic. Clever, huh? Right, so here are some tips if you are planning on doing IELTS listening anytime soon. Number 1, read the instructions. Always, always, always read the instructions. And when you are waiting, like there's always a few minutes to kind of read through the questions. Use that time. Use that time to look at the gaps and see if you can predict what the listening might be about. This is a very, very useful thing to do. We actually do it all the time in our first language. We predict what we're going to hear. So to do it on the test, and it will help. I have found, I mean, again, the listings are really easy for me because I'm a first language speaker and I've been doing this for a long time, but I have found that if I don't read the questions and predict, I will get answers wrong. So, so definitely do that. Definitely read and predict. The listing goes in order too. So if you miss something, just keep going. It doesn't matter that you missed something. Just keep going. You'll have a chance to get back to it. Spelling counts. So be careful. If you have the right word, but it is spelled wrong, then you're going to get it wrong. So make sure that you practice your spelling before you take the test. And then, okay, so the test itself is 30 minutes, but then you have 10 minutes to transfer your answers to an answer sheet. So use that time really carefully. So if you missed any questions, this is your chance to have another guess and think about what you heard. This is also a chance for you to check your spelling, and it's a chance to check your grammar. So if the answer is grammatically incorrect, it's the wrong answer, okay? And also, as I said, reading the instructions will tell you, like some sections you can only have 2 words or 3 or 2 words and a number. So pay attention to that, especially when you are checking your answers to make sure that you have followed the instructions. Okay, so that is listening. Now let's talk about speaking. The speaking exam is 12 to 15 minutes. It consists of 3 parts. So part 1 is kind of simple, personal questions. Part 2 is a longer turn, and you're expected to talk for 1 to 2 minutes. And then part 3 is a more complex discussion with the examiner. So in part 1, you might be asked some questions about your work or your school or your general life. You could be asked questions about your hobbies or just really simple questions that you should be able to answer. Hopefully you'll be able to answer them. Then in part 2, you're still going to get a personal question, but you need to speak about it for an extended period of time. So that's really the challenge. So it could be something like talk about a birthday that was very special to you, or a house you'd like to live in, or someone you admire, whatever. It's still personal, but it is, it's longer, and you're expected to speak uninterrupted. Part 3 is a more complex discussion with the examiner. I'm going to say it's not really a discussion because you will be talking with the examiner, but you're going to be doing most of the talking. And whatever you had as your part 2 question, part 3 will be related, but it's going to be more abstract. So whereas part 1 and part 2 are personal, part 3 is more about the wider world. So let's say in part 2 you were asked about birthdays, describe a special birthday you had or someone you know had. Then in part 3, you might be asked about celebrations, why celebrations are important, how do people in your country celebrate birthdays, how has it changed? So notice that these questions are more abstract, and they're more about society in general. So the other thing I will point out to you is the test gets harder as you go. So you start with part 1, it's pretty easy, part 2 is a little harder, and then part 3 is more complicated. So let's talk about how IELTS speaking is scored. They basically look at a couple different things. They look at how fluent you are, so how much you can say in a short time. They look at your pronunciation, so that's going to be individual words. So are you clear with individual words? How about your intonation? Can you raise and lower the tone of your voice to to indicate how you see something, and also, are you able to stress words and pause when it's appropriate? These are things that will be looked at for your pronunciation. And also, of course, your vocabulary and grammar is going to be looked at. So for vocabulary and for grammar, what is your range of vocabulary? What is your range of grammar? Is it accurate? Are you using it correctly? And is it appropriate for the topic? So maybe you are talking about something and you need language to describe celebrations, and you try and use a word like you say to make a party, but really it's throw a party. Well, as an examiner, I'm going to think, hey, that's great. You kind of have this idea of organizing party, yay, but you've used it wrong, boo. So always try to say as much as you can for the speaking. I want to go back to writing because I feel like I didn't explain that so well. So as I said, there are two parts to the writing test. There's an academic and general training test one. Okay, so academic writing test one is a description of some sort of visual data, like a graph or something like that. And you have 150 words and 20 minutes to complete it. General training test one is writing a letter, and you have 250 words that you need to write. You have 40 minutes to complete this. Sorry, I was really rushing with this, so it's not perfect. I guess it's good to know that I'm not perfect, but I do know what I'm talking about. For test two, the test is actually the same for general and academic. This is the second part of the writing exam. You will have to write an essay based on your opinion. The questions are a little bit different if you're doing academic compared to general, but they're not really that different, to be honest. You're still writing an essay based on your opinion, so I feel like they're pretty similar. Here are some tips for IELTS writing. Always do the tasks in order. Take time to understand the question. Try and think of as many ideas as you possibly can. Write a little plan and do all of that before you start writing. Once you've finished taking time to understand the question, thinking of as many ideas as you possibly can, and planning, now you can write your answer. And once you've done that, make sure you edit, okay? Make sure you edit before you turn in your answer. Here are some things that IELTS looks at when they're scoring your work. Number one, did you answer the question? Number two, how organized your work is. So does your work kind of have logical sense? Do you have paragraphs? Do you have linking words? When I read it, does it have a logical flow to it? Vocabulary and grammar. Have you used a range of vocabulary? Have you used a range of grammar? Is it accurate? Are you using it right? And is it appropriate? Is it, if your task is about school, is the language that you've used about school? That would be what we mean when we talk about appropriate. So that is an overview of IELTS. And now I'm just going to give you a couple other tips for the IELTS exam. I'm just going to talk about some things I hear people say that are not true. First of all, the best thing you can do to study is practice. So practice all of the different test types. And if you're a lower level student, you should really start on just improving your general English. It's pretty hard to get a good score on IELTS if your general English is just a little bit too low. I would not recommend, if you want to get like a 5.5 and above, I would not take IELTS until I was about medium level of English. It's just too hard for you to learn all of the text. You can practice the test techniques as much as you want, but if your language level is too low, then it's not going to help you. I mean, it's kind of like, I think, if my older brother, who knows nothing about this exam, took the exam tomorrow, he would probably get a 7.5 at least. And that's because he has the language level. And he probably wouldn't get a perfect score because he doesn't know how to take the test. I'd like to think I'd get a 9. Actually, thinking about that, I forgot to mention, how is the test scored? Well, the test is scored from 0 which means you booked it, but you didn't turn up, to 9, which is an expert user. So very low level students will get between, let's say 1. Very few people get a 1, honestly, but lower level students tend to get around 3 or 4, maybe 2, but that's pretty low. Then if you're intermediate, you're probably going to be hitting somewhere between 4 and 6, or 6.5, and that 0.5 is actually a really big difference on the IELTS exam. The 0.5 is like 3 months of study, really. So to go from a 6 to 6.5 doesn't sound like a lot, but it really actually is. It's a difference from being like a basic intermediate level student to a higher level intermediate student. It's not nothing. Students who are higher level tend to get somewhere 7 and above. It is possible to get a 9, but it's very hard to get a 9. You really have to be an expert user. You can't make any mistakes. And yeah, it's hard. It's doable though. It does happen, but it is rare. What else was I going to say to you? Just some tips I've heard people think are good. If you think going to a different center is going to help you do a better job on IELTS, it probably won't. Everybody gets trained in the same way, so probably not. And if you don't get the score you want, I would probably wait and take the test again. I'd wait at least 6 weeks so you can work on the area you need to improve. Those are my tips for today. I can probably do some more tips on a different day, but this is just something to get you started if you were thinking about taking the IELTS exam. We'll be doing more IELTS tests or IELTS classes in the coming weeks for free. And also you can go over to bounceenglish.rocks, and we have a number of resources available right now for IELTS students if you're interested. So that's about it for today. Thank you for stopping by. I'll catch you later. Bye-bye.